Hello and welcome to the 28th Annual Get Lit Festival. I'm Kate Peterson, Director of Get Lit Programs, a nonprofit organization housed within Eastern Washington University. Our program is responsible for Get Lit, Washington State's longest-running annual literary festival. We host dozens of free and low-cost readings, craft classes, panel discussions, a full book fair, and more every April in downtown Spokane. This year, we're thrilled to be joined by headliners Tessa Hulls, Willie Vlaughton, and Keitcha Kuipers, alongside 60 other talented writers from across our region and beyond. You can find a full schedule of all in-person and virtual events, along with information about all of our festival authors by visiting our website, getlitfestival.org. Now I'd like to welcome Mackenzie Draper, GetLit's Assistant Coordinator, to introduce today's event.
Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to be presenting today's event, The Arctic Circle, Reflections on a Residency with Kathryn Nuernberger and Mita Mahato. Writing residencies are transformative settings for artistic inspiration and development, no matter where they are or what you're writing. Kathryn and Mita, both writers with multiple residencies under their belts, will share work made in response to their experiences with the Arctic Circle, a small vessel voyage residency program in the Norwegian Arctic of Svalbard. Their conversation will touch on the benefits of the residency for their own work, how it impacted their writing processes, and the surprising lessons they learned along the way. Kathryn's work often explores the complications of family and loss. Mita's work centers ecosystemic death and renewal, and both writers are deeply interested in climate change and salvaging something new out of what has been discarded. This conversation will be moderated by festival author Margaret Albaugh. Margaret will be helping to introduce today's authors, so let's begin by introducing Margaret.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Margaret is a Chinese-American award-winning photographer, freelance journalist, and visual artist. Her work has been in the New York Times, Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, Politico, and The Guardian. She is also a poet and writer and enjoys the ways words and images can complement each other and intensify an artistic experience. Her debut artist book, Where I End and You Begin, came out in 2025 with Ben Shop Books and utilizes imagery and poetry to explore her experiences of motherhood. Thanks so much for being here with us today, Margaret.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to introduce our first reading. Our first reading is by Mita Mahato. Mita is a comics artist and poet whose work joins fragments of used and discarded materials in poetic experiments that dramatize ecosystemic survival against capitalism. Her books are Arctic Play, The Third Thing 2024, and In Between, Pleiades 2017. And her poetry comics have appeared in places including Prism, Ecotone, Shenandoah, Iterant, Anomaly, and Drunken Boat. She currently lives in Seattle. Please welcome Mita.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here in conversation with Kate and Margaret. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. So what I will be sharing today are a few pieces from my most recent book, Arctic Play, from The Third Thing. Just a few notes to preface. This book is made up of 3 acts, and each act has a different visual style and approach. I will be reading from acts 1 and 2. So the first act is made up of diagram poems, and the first one I will be reading to you is called The 30 Passengers Are. The 30 passengers are short. The 30 passengers are tall. The 30 passengers are an organism wearing khaki, violet, red, orange, lavender, white, yellow, teal, green, gray, black, blue jackets. An organism wearing khaki jackets, violet jackets, red jackets, orange jackets, lavender jackets, white jackets, yellow jackets, teal jackets, green jackets, gray jackets, black jackets, blue jackets. This next poem is about purple sandpipers. Purple sandpipers alight on sand, a light on rocks. Purple sandpipers scuttle along. Purple sandpipers walk at a clip. Purple sandpipers wade in shallow water. Purple sandpipers trace the shoreline. Purple sandpipers peck at pebbles. Purple sandpipers are small, are plump. Purple sandpipers have brown, white, spotted, mottled plumage, have narrow bills, have long orange bills, have long orange legs. Purple sandpipers stay a while. Purple sandpipers pass by. And the last piece from Act 1 that I'll read is about rocks. Rocks are smooth, sharp, rough, barnacled. Rocks are marble, granite, gypsum, gneiss, sandstone, limestone, basalt, dolomite, dolerite, quartzite, and hydrite, shale, schist. Rocks are fossils. Rocks are red, gray, black, white, yellow, green, orange, brown, pink. Rocks are a landmass, shapeless, circular, square. Rocks are like hearts, like horse heads. Rocks are hunks of flesh, cuts of meat. Rocks are kinetic, aging. Pink, brown, orange, green, yellow, white, black, gray, red. A landmass, shapeless, circular, square like hearts, square like horse heads, square hunks of flesh, cuts of meat, white, fossils, barnacled hearts, barnacled horse heads, barnacled hunks of flesh, cuts of meat. Rocks are hunks of flesh, cuts of meat, aging, pink. Okay, so Act 2 of Arctic Play is inspired by conversations that I was part of while I was on the residency that all kind of reflect on dealing with strange encounters. And the two scenes that I'm reading today are kind of, resonating, playing off of the Rocks poem. So that'll keep things a little bit coherent. So this is scene 3 from Act 2. On this next day, we explore a rocky area recently made accessible by the melting of a glacier. Whoa, come look at this. What? It's a sirloin steak. And here is a perfectly marbled ribeye. Ha, I see. This rock here looks like a filet mignon. If we laid one on styrofoam and under plastic wrap and placed it between the ground beef and chicken thighs at the market, someone would buy it. I would. Red rock flesh everywhere I step. It looks like murder out here. And this is scene 4 from Act 2. This morning, our last, we scavenge a moraine for souvenir fossils. I find one, maybe a fern. I find 5. Can I have one of yours? Okay. we take these ghosts, millions of years old, home with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mita. That was wonderful. And now I'm pleased to introduce Kathryn Nuernberger. Kathryn's latest book is Held, Essays in Belonging, which is about symbiotic mutualisms, climate change, and finding family at the end of the world. She is also the author of The Witch of I and the poetry collections Rue, The End of Pink, and Rag and Bone. Her first lyric essay collection, Brief Interviews with the Romantic Past, won the Journal Nonfiction Award. Other awards include the James Laughlin Prize from the Academy of American Poets, an NEA Fellowship, and notable essays in the Best American Series. She is a professor of creative writing in the MFA program at University of Minnesota. Please welcome Kathryn.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I am very excited to be in company with Margaret and Mita, whose work I both admire so much, and grateful to Kate and Mackenzie for letting me be part of the festival in this virtual way. I know from having once lived in Spokane what a lovely event it is. So it's nice to be with you all. I'm going to read two very brief flash essays from this book, Held. I'm showing you the cover because I want you to see the art, which is by Sarah Nelson, who is a visual artist who I met on the boat, the Arctic, who was also obsessed at that time with symbiotic mutualisms. And I should, so that's a crocodile whose teeth is being cleaned by a little birdie. They get along with each other. I'm going to read one essay from the very beginning of the book and one from nearly the very end. This is called Moss. Back home, the sculptor had been carving boulders from huge hunks of styrofoam that wash up every day on the banks of the East River. Once he screwed together a cairn of 3 feather-light, super realistic glacial erratics, which he then tied to the roof of his Nissan. He drove around the city, not noticing at first how he shed a pebbly dusting of styrofoam anywhere he went. Sometimes the first draft of an idea is like that. A woman at a sidewalk cafe came over to yell at him as he fed the meter. She had a point, he said, but also, is it more ethical to leave the styrofoam by the water, or does it just feel better not to have to know it's there? We were talking about the aesthetics of salvage in the dining room of a ship chugging its engine across the Arctic Circle after a day spent walking through a walrus graveyard. The line of skulls and ribs lay at the far end of what had once been a poaching camp where the hunters abandoned anything that wasn't a tusk. The underside of a sun-bleached flipper bone had grown green with moss. It was the first time I had seen green in weeks. When the sun stops setting, the sky is always gray. The ice and water fall into a range of black, white, blue, and gray. All of the birds and any sea creatures who lifted their heads above the water, it seemed, were black, white, blue, and gray. I didn't know then that just picking up a bone and exposing the moss to the air for the length of minutes it took to get a picture I would later post to Instagram could kill it or cost it years of its slow growth. I didn't realize face down beneath the snow, everything that was alive in the bones passes through the moss to become alive again in the thin dust of the rocky soil. Closer to shore, I came upon some green plastic fish netting. I tried to clean up the plastic whenever I encountered it, but a few mossy sprigs had become so entangled with the fraying filaments, the two could not be separated. My offering to the table of artists and scientists were little stories about mutualisms I'd been collecting, wolves and ravens hunting together, figs with calyxes full of their pollinating wasps, crocodiles opening their mouths wide to birds who fly in to pick their teeth clean. I'd gotten some grants to visit deserts and bogs, mixed hardwood forests and tall grass prairies, and now the Arctic Circle, to observe such creatures living their lives entangled in each other. So that we might learn how to live this way too, I said in the applications, though I wasn't sure I believed my own line of bull. At the most northern point our ship would reach, the captain dropped anchor and shut off the engines. It was the only time in 3 weeks we would not be groaning that perpetual roar. An ecologist chronicling the soundscape of narwhals dropped her hydrophone in the water and strained to hear. This was her only chance to catch even a faint echo of their singing, and she'd been waiting 3 weeks for such a moment of perfect quiet. Narwhals cannot bear the sound of ship engines and retreat as far into the ice pack as they can to escape the hum. The geologist took out a box of ashes we did not know she'd been carrying this whole way. Her brother, who loved the ocean almost as much as he'd loved her, had died unexpectedly the year before, and she decided to let her part of him go here, in a place he said he'd always dreamed of returning to once more. We were all silent on deck together for many minutes. Perhaps because this voyage had been delayed for 3 years due to the pandemic, it seemed as if each of us were carrying a funeral of our own within us. Every face I looked at was somewhere far away. I was too. Then the sculptor took out his guitar and began to play. I am sorry to tell you, the ecologist did not hear any narwhals. She didn't really think she would, she said, and it wasn't necessary to her research, but she was sniffing back what might have been a tear. There are still yet narwhals. There are still polar bears and walruses too, which we saw often enough, specks in our binoculars. But we did not see anything that day, except the gray of the sky, the gray of the water, and each other. And since it's such a downer, that one, I start by making you sad and spend the whole book trying to apologize. Thresholds. A few years ago, 2 explorers made the last summer hike to the North Pole. So much ice had melted they had to wear wetsuits and ford rivers of glacial meltwaters, pulling their sled of gear behind like a raft. The next year, and every year since, you can only make the journey by boat, which is something else entirely. Back home in Mexico City, Perla makes installations. In her most recent, she turned an art gallery into a rock field. The floor was covered in small stones, but she also rolled in massive boulders to hold the space. In pictures from her portfolio, you can see adults leaning against the cool black boulders while children sit in the pebbles, running handfuls through their fingers and watching how they fall. She was the eldest of us, and when a COVID outbreak passed through the ship, became the most ill of anyone. When she was finally well enough to walk on deck, someone had to hold firmly to her elbow so the wind would not knock her back. I had to remind myself she was a sculptor who wielded mountains. Unable to carry herself very far while the rest of us hiked the glacier, she gathered tern feathers and a little of the bright blue fishing net strands we'd find clumped up on all the beaches. She roped them together into a miniature doorway she'd balance on a hunk of washed up ice. Then she'd wait for some glimmer of light to pass through and take a picture. At dinner, after the long hike up the back of a fast-melting glacier, she asked me for my phone and insisted I describe every picture I'd taken. I liked sitting with her because I was still bleeding a little every day, and though I didn't want to talk about it, it felt less frightening to be near one of the only other people on the boat who'd ever been pregnant. Where the ice had melted, there was a vast rock field entirely made of petrified wood. Any boulder you might sit on to catch your breath, you soon realized was a huge and ancient tree stump. Everywhere boughs had become marble-smooth stones. On one side, you could run your thumb along polished bark. On the other, the reddish gleam of heartwood, coursing veins that had carried sap to and from the roots. I repeated to Perla what the geologist among us had told me. During the Triassic, all this land had been a tropical forest at the equator. As tectonic plates shifted these islands north, the ice pressed and pressed those trees into something else entirely. Her favorite of my pictures was the one I took at the place where the river of melting ice slowed its torrent into a wide, smooth delta passing into the sea. Long strands of algae drifted, a lovely green across the glittering sand. There is grief and fear of the grief to come, and the smallest hope things could be different. The algae was beautiful, and also another sign of a place at the beginning and end of itself. In my pocket, I had 4 hunks of petrified wood I had collected. One for Brian, one for his mother, who is always picking up some bit of quartz that has caught her eye, one for my kid, and one I felt guilty for taking, as if it was no gift, just a greedy hunger to fill my pockets with as much of this beauty as I could carry. Perla said she could not accept something so precious as we hugged goodnight, so I slipped it in the pocket of the sweater that hung so loose now around her shoulders. After 20 days without cell service or Wi-Fi, we docked. One of the guides drove me straight to a clinic where 2 kind Norwegian women, bashful about their English, turned the ultrasound screen toward me and say, "Look, 2 heartbeats. One twin is too small, precariously small. I should see a specialist when I get home." But as I start to fret, the doctor looks me in the eye and says firmly, "But today there are 2 heartbeats." I stop at the cafe across from the clinic and find Perla eating a piece of lingonberry pie she says is too much for her. She points to the chair beside her and hands me a fork. As we eat, I tell her this secret I've been carrying for so long, like a stone in my pocket. Today there are 2 heartbeats.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. That was really beautiful. So Kathryn and Mita, you've both done multiple residencies, and I was wondering what drew you to this residency in the Arctic specifically? And also a follow-up question, how did the timing of this residency affect your work?
I can start. So I did the residency back in 2017, and the book did take about 7 years to finish. But yeah, at the time or prior to applying, I had directed a lot of my focus onto the sea. I was making a lot of work related to whales and marine life, and a friend of mine forwarded the call to me, and she said, "You need to be on this boat." And it made sense. I was really interested in thinking about how to navigate or how to kind of think about navigation in ways that disrupt our familiar ways, and to really kind of think about not projecting our understanding of movement onto other animals, like whales. And so being at sea, literally, felt like a good way to kind of open up my practice. And so that is why I applied, and yeah, was delighted to get in.
And I I picked the residency because I really love going to residencies where there are specialists in things I'm not a specialist in. So I mean, writers' residencies are really wonderful because of being in conversation with always other writers is always wonderful. But the idea there would be scientists on board doing scientific work was very appealing to me because I thought that would be really invigorating to the kind of work I was doing. So that was the reason I really wanted to go. So I was like, oh, artists and scientists, those will be lively conversations. And they really were. That was a really wonderful thing about the residency. In terms of the timeline, so I applied when I was like maybe 1 year into this project. It was still kind of a twinkle in my eye where I was just even like figuring out, like still making my little list of like what even are the symbiotic mutualisms, and thinking that that was a countable number. Like, oh, there would be 20 of them in the world or something. Thinking it was this like rare thing, and not understanding like everything, not understanding how messed up my sense of mutualism would get and how expansive. I talk about my land of bull, like I knew so little. I just wanted to go. So I was like, I need to cook up a sexy application. So I was like, so I was like, what are the mutualisms in the Arctic? And so lion's mane jellyfish. I didn't see a single lion's mane jellyfish the whole time I was there. We were too far north. They actually need the water a little warmer. I was asking the guides about them while like just hanging over the side of the boat every day. And one of the guides was like, oh yeah, those are down in Tromsø, which is like where we had like transferred flights earlier. She's like, they're disgusting and they're all over the harbor this summer. So I like missed them entirely by going too far north. And then, so I wrote at the very beginning of the project, and then I was supposed to go the next year, and then there was a pandemic. And so by the time I actually was there writing the book, it was 5 years later. The book felt done when I went. I was like, oh dear, I'm going to go pretend to do a project that's done. But I was doing revisions, and I ended up, I think it's not an accident, I wound up with the beginning and the ending while I was there, because I think I was in a really good place to kind of understand the arc of the thing. And the experience was great for kind of getting perspective and figuring out how to frame everything I've been learning along the way. So, yeah.
So that's really interesting. It sounds like even though you were about a year into your project, you felt like pretty close to completion as you were starting the journey with it, or starting your journey in the Arctic.
Yeah, I should clarify. So I wrote the application, and then a year goes by before you even like really hear back about the application. And then they say, you'll go next summer. So now it's going to be year 2, but then the pandemic hit. So then what would have been year 2 turns out to be year 5, because 3 years went by because of the delays with all of the different variants. And we still, I mean, I was very glad not to be on that ship without a vaccine, but even still, once we were all vaccinated, we still, everyone else got very sick. I was like the only one. And I think it was because I had COVID like the week before I got on the boat. And then anyway, that's almost boring and very tedious. COVID.
Do you think that you could, just curious, do you think you could have finished this project without having gone on this residency?
Well, I don't think it would have been I thought it was good at the time, but I think it was a much better book for having done the residency. One of the things that happened, I ended up writing, I think 5 or 6 Arctic pieces made their way in these sort of short essays into the mix. And almost all of them were pieces that were in conversation with the work of the artist or the scientist. So there was a way that the work became much more peopled. The book became much more peopled by humans thinking about the same questions I was thinking about. Also, that's the pregnancy emerges through the Arctic Circle. I found out a week before I was supposed to leave that I was pregnant. And I, went to my doctor and was like, what are the ways you die on a ship in the Arctic with no Wi-Fi, no self-service? She's like, I think just ectopic pregnancy. So I got an ultrasound before I left. And then I started bleeding on the plane and like called my husband and was like, well, never mind. Because I was like, I can't leave him hanging. I can't come back in 3 weeks. And then it just turned out it wasn't. It was pregnancy is weird. But what I wanted to say about that was my husband, who knows the way to my heart so well, was like, I really feel like we should try to have another baby because you really can't write a book about symbiotic mutualism without a pregnancy. Don't you think that's essential? And I was like, I was like so uninterested in having a baby. And I was like, actually, that's a very compelling point. All right. That's a longer, mostly distracting story, but that is how, because I was pregnant on the ship, that is a way that the pregnancy becomes one of the mutualisms in the book, which is also useful, I think, artistically.
Yeah, that's a really funny and great anecdote. He should be in marketing. A question for both of you. You guys went at very different times, different eras, right? So one is pre-COVID and one is post-COVID. So I was curious, what did you do to prepare for your residencies, and in what ways did you maybe not feel so prepared or wish that you had done or prepared differently for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we all got a list of recommended, required things to bring along, and I probably overdid that a little bit. And did a lot of research on what kinds were the right boots to bring and which ones not to bring. And still I ended up not having, I only had like really like cold weather gloves and mittens. So like really puffy. And so like when I was out on shore, I couldn't make anything because you take your gloves off and it's too cold to hold a pen. So there were things like that that I was unprepared for. But I think that for me, it's interesting because unlike Kate, I did have a project that I had applied with that I was intending on working on. And for me, like that preparation just had to be completely thrown out because there was no way that once I got there and realized what the situation was, what it felt like, how I didn't know how to kind of make sense of what was around me, how I couldn't use my pen outside or use my scalpel outside. That I had to kind of like just let my expectations and anticipations, like everything that I thought this trip was going to be about, I just had to let go of that. And that was, I think, the best thing that I could do was just to kind of like let my brain be empty and let the place fill it. And yeah, so I mean, I think that was like the biggest unexpected thing, and it was kind of the thing that made this book happen, where I just I didn't even know if making art, writing at all was the right thing to do. I was having all of these questions about the role of art, why do artists need to travel so far to write about climate change, which is everywhere. So I had all of these questions that kind of confronted me, that I think that had I been, too focused on the project that I intended on doing, I would not have been open to hearing.
I'm so glad you talked about the ambivalence of being on the trip. I felt so guilty and ashamed. Like I so wanted to go, and I was also like, how could I trying to contend with my own hypocrisy? And at some point, I think it was one of the other artists in conversation with this. I at some point was like, I'm just gonna have to be outrageously audacious and believe my voice matters so much that I can write something that will justify this carbon footprint. I don't know that I've succeeded, but that is, but I feel like I'll spend the rest of my life trying to write something that makes it worth it. the question about being preparing, right? So like unexpected preparation. Well, I got a real quick ultrasound and then I packed. I live in Minnesota, and one of the things that made me the year I was applying for the residency, it was so cold in Minnesota. It was colder here than at the Arctic Circle. At one point, it was like -50 wind chill, and it's actually because partially it's climate change, right? Because the Earth is kind of a deflated basketball. We're not a perfect globe; it's a little mushy at the top, and this sometimes results in the Arctic jet stream getting pushed down. And as the waters get warmer at the top of the Earth, it pushes that Arctic jet stream down lower. So we get colder down here, and they're chilling in the 30s or the 20s or the zeros, but like not -50 above us further north. So weirdly enough, when it's really cold in North America, or if it's really cold at our latitudes, that is actually all the more reason to be freaked out about climate change. But my point, it was very cold. I have a lot of really good winter weather gear. I was going on the summer trip, so I was like feeling pretty prepared. I'm like, they don't make warmer mittens than I have in the world, so I'm ready. But I did have this sort of notion of I'm not a water person. I'm landlocked. I'm a Midwesterner, and I did not register when they were talking about boots. I was like, I have very warm boots. But what they're for winter. Anyway, I did not understand that we were going to be on these zodiacs, which are these little boats that the water would not be ice. And we would have to get, like, the first day when they're describing how do you get off the zodiac, you like swing your legs this way and then you jump in the water and then you walk onto the shore. And I was like, but my boots they were not waterproof boots. Like I was just imagining ice and snow. And so they had a pair of like they had one pair of extra boots on the ship that were not like cold weather boots. They were just like galoshes, and they were like, you can use these. And so I would like carry my warm boots, and I have to like change my shoes on shore, or I would just like double up on side. Anyway, so I was like really not prepared in like a pretty essential way, which is like I had the wrong boots, and I was like, but I didn't want to spend anyway. I didn't have $250. I should have found $250 to pay for the boots they recommended, but I was thinking I knew better because I'm from Minnesota, which I am not knowing better. So that was like a small way I was unprepared, but like the big way I was unprepared was like, how do you prepare to have a miscarriage that then halfway through turns out not to have been a miscarriage on a boat with no doctors and surrounded mostly by very young, lovely people, but but people who have like never experienced, pregnancy or, just like their bodies are so they were so young and falling in love with each other and having like reckless sex with Russians and like just really wonderful good times. And I was like, I'm going to try to spoil this by being your cautionary like specter from the future. I don't know if we answered your question. I got distracted, but
you did it. Yeah. Shoot, that was going to take me to a different question, but now I forgot it. But hopefully it'll come back to me. But something that Mita said kind of brought me to another question. Mita, you had said about letting my brain be empty and letting the place fill it. And in a past interview, you had talked about agency with this residency and how you've had to allow the place to open itself up to you to have its own agency. I was wondering if you could talk more about that, and maybe talk about ways that you've thought more about place and agency since then.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Like I have been interested in environmental issues, natural world, all of these words that we have for ecosystems that we live in for a long time. But I think that even though I was, asking these questions about how do I represent others without imposing too much of my own sense of their lives onto them, when I got to the Arctic, I think that question was just like, I don't know, I was confronted with something that was so uncomfortable to me. And by that I mean, like my senses and the way that I'm used to navigating and relying on my brain and relying on the internet or relying on, friends around me. I mean, I had wonderful fellow artists, then we had the best conversations, but there was always kind of like a little bit of a discomfort and an unfamiliarity that I had to learn how to get used to. And once I sat in that, things started opening up for me. Like the poem about the sandpipers, I just spent hours just sitting on the shore watching these sandpipers walking back and forth along the shore. And there was something that was really meaningful to just let that happen without there being any expectation of what that might turn into or how to articulate that, how to represent that for others. And yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be until much later after I came back from the trip that those questions of representation started coming up for me. And so something that I have held onto since then is kind of like how important it is just to listen to place and listen for our connections, and just to sit quietly and not have to kind of like gain control over something, even if it's through my words, poetic expression. And then, that listening, that kind of sitting with is part of the creative process, that those interrelations that you create with a place is part of that creative process, even if it results in something that ends up being on paper or not. So that's something that I've definitely held on to, treasured since that trip.
Yeah, and something else that you had said, Mita, is that climate change is everywhere. What is something that you've taken, especially with that idea of agency, and brought into understanding your work and your art and your process into other places?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I don't think I mentioned, but that echoes in Kathryn's stories as well, was that there was like plastics everywhere in the Arctic, and that was something also that was unexpected. And so when I got home and was working on Act 2, I took plastics from my grocery store shopping and embedded that into handmade paper. So those were kind of the blue areas that you saw in the background pages. And something that I think about from this trip and continue to kind of think about generally is kind of these interconnections that even when you're in the Arctic, you can kind of see the global systems and conditions that are having an impact on that place, are having an impact on Seattle, are having an impact on Minneapolis, and like how all of these things are really intertwined. And so that's kind of one of the other big things that I've taken into my work is kind of to really think with systems in mind. And that means also working hybridly and trying to kind of think about how poetry and comics and collage and let's put all of this paper into a blender and kind of to really tune into all of those kinds of interconnections formally as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense and really speaks to the different processes and how we connect with the world around us in those processes. And then Kathryn, a question for you. I'm just going to read a quick excerpt from Held. I'd gotten some grants to visit deserts and bogs, mixed hardwood forests and tallgrass prairies, and now the Arctic Circle, to observe such creatures living their lives entangled in each other, so that we might learn how to live this way too. I said in my applications, though, I wasn't sure that I believed my own line of bull. So my question for you, and maybe both of you, after experiencing the Arctic and this residency and perhaps life, what would you suggest to people about living an entangled life? And what lessons around this question have changed since your residency?
I was actually thinking while Mita was sharing her work about how I love the way her style in Arctic play really kind of captures the I don't know, like the filaments of connection or the ways of connecting, like the way the visual poems make you kind of keep going back and reimagining the sentence going in a different direction, or like all of the possibilities of the sentence are kind of held in one page. I think that's so magical, and it feels like, and also I think that there's some of your work is very geometrical in a way that, like, the ship is like, you got these like corridors of like little cubicle rooms. And so there's this way that human organization systems often feel very the ship is this little, like, is its own little, like, community, right? Like we become this little community, but there's a way that there's like an artificiality to it. That's both like the artificiality of we throw people together for this like limited amount of time in this very like unnatural, like residencies are deeply unnatural frameworks in which to come together. Um, um, and I'm thinking about that in contrast to like the meat of those stones and how they're very organic and blobby, and there's a way that they're fluid. I'm just thinking about your work right now. I'm sorry, I have a hard time. Linear thinking is hard for me. I think what I feel like in terms of entanglement, so I have two trains of thought with it. And one is it's an astonishingly beautiful way to be in the world, right? Is to just be like, everything is entangled all the time. Everything needs each other. We are so embedded in the world around us. It needs us, we need it. We are just entwined. I find that very astonishingly beautiful way to live. And it makes me feel like hopeful, even if I walk out my front door and see nothing but invasive species, I'm like, but I am entangled in you too. Like there's a way that there's something life affirming even in troubled things. And then I guess I would say like, but also, and then the second thought I have was just sort of a downer because I'm trained as a poet. And so that means I'm like a professional downer, is like that it's the responsibility of such an entanglement is also very overwhelming, and that every choice I make has ripple effects. And so how to how to justify that I want to trip to the Arctic Circle, I cannot, right? But like so I feel very acutely the my carbon footprint in a very deep way, and that's daunting, maybe let's say daunting, and sometimes shame gets wrapped up in that too. But I also know that like if you get too deep in shame, you become inert and then you do nothing. And maybe humans should do nothing. We should sit still for a while, but like I think we need to sit still for a while in like a very intentional way, not a depressed way, or else yes, I don't have great words. I only can read the words I've written and revised many times to be smart. But yeah, I would just say something about the entanglement makes me feel both like brought to my knees by beauty and also brought to my knees by responsibility.
I think that's such a great answer. And I think you both have spoken so much and so eloquently. Maybe you don't feel that way, but I think it's very eloquent about the idea of systems and entanglement and the various relationships and responsibilities we have to each other. Mita, you're welcome to also answer if you'd like.
I think I love the way Kathryn answered it, and it resonates with me. And I think that like whether we observe our entanglements or not, I think we are entangled, and yeah, sometimes it feels terrible, because there's this recognition that there are hierarchies operating within those entanglements too, and power structures and all of that. But yeah, I think that's the downer that I wanted to add there as well. But yeah, the other note that I wanted to make is that I love this kind of back and forth between me and Kathryn, like that's rooted in this residency, and just like noting also the resonances between our work, and like the listing of colors was like really kind of in my ear as well, and just kind of like what are the words available to us when we're describing something that is so undescribable, so that's just a little non sequitur add-on.
Can I go off script and ask you about color, Mita? So one of the things when you were reading, I was like, Mita's has so many more colors than me. But I was thinking while you were reading about the meat stones, right? So I'm curious if you say more about that. But the thought I was having is I was remembering, oh, that's right. There was all that red algae, which is the red algae is a sign of climate change too. Like so sometimes the glaciers would have like a really kind of messy, bloody look to them. And I realized I thought I was losing this pregnancy. So I was just in a very, I was very gloomy. And so I was really just seeing very gloomy colors. But I also am thinking, I was also like, when color appeared, it was in the plastic, or, it was often, with the exception of that moss, very unnatural, or it was a sign of apocalypse. So I was like, kind of, I think, cropping it out, where I was like, that's not real, or that doesn't belong here, therefore, which I was just thinking about your work, Mita, and how you saw so many colors, but also like your capacity to bring it in. But I was wondering if those rocks were my one question. I'm interested in hearing you talk more about color and cropping, but also were those rocks covered in red algae? Is that what made them red and meaty? Or
Yeah, I think it was iron content actually, because they were like everywhere and they're broken apart, and so I don't think it was algae, but I know what you're talking about too, and it was kind of interesting to note. It's like the jackets. It's like we have all the color in the world in these vestments that we're wearing. And at the time, like the basis for that poem was we had to line up I don't know if you all had to do this, but we had to line up and pretend to be a single organism walking towards these walruses so they won't be frightened by us. And so I was just kind of trying to imagine like, what is this walrus even perceiving us as, So that was not a coherent response, but yes, color.
can I tell you my walrus story? Margaret, can I tell everyone my walrus story?
Absolutely.
So one of our guides, Sarah, who is maybe on your ship, because I think she's on most of the ships. Yeah, lovely person, fantastic photographer, actually. She took me aside. I think she decided she wanted to cheer me up. Possibly. I think it became an interesting project. Can you cheer Kate up? I was such a downer on this trip. Anyway, so but she came up to me when we were doing this. We were doing the same walk to see the walruses, or possibly not the same, but there was a sandbank covered up in walruses, and so we were approaching them, and there were like 37 walruses, I think we counted. I heard that. I remember someone counted them with their binoculars. But she takes me aside into the water. I was wearing the galoshes that day, not my not waterproof pink boots, and shows me. She's like, she pulls me aside. She's like, I am going to show you a trick, and she has the water. And she starts kind of grinding her foot back and forth in the like kind of pebbly sand in the water, and she's like, you do it too. And so I'm doing what she does. I'm just grinding my foot back and forth in the water. And she's like, we are calling them. And then like one walrus in the distance like lifts his head up, and she's like, and look, and he's coming closer. She's like, he's falling in love with us, and he gets like so close, and or maybe not so close, but it felt so close, and it was so amazing. And I like definitely like my whole body was like a light with like the magic of walruses. I'm like, I'm gonna go home and be like those like woo-woo people that think dolphins are like the like angels of healing or something. I'm gonna be this way, but like with walruses. And I a little bit am possibly. I feel like I just felt like they were like vibrating through my whole body. It was so cool. And yeah, walruses are amazing. That's really just my point. Walruses are so cool.
They really are. And so many animals I feel like we don't give enough attention to. But anyways.
Yeah, Margaret, do you have one in mind?
Oh, I love octopuses. Those have become like my new obsession. And I feel like we don't give enough time to them and honor their magic. Okay, I remembered my follow-up question, and I probably should have asked this earlier just to give the audience a little bit more background info, but how long was this residency?
I think it's 21, 22 days at sea. And then you've got a couple days in Svalbard on the front end and a couple days in front on the back end in case of delays, weather delays or like other logistics. So that way everybody can get there, even if their planes get messed up, and everybody gets home on time in case the ship gets messed up. Does that sound right to you, Mita? Is that the same for your trip?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so somewhere under a month, but around that. Well, I was just curious, especially for artists who are interested in residencies, whether they be in Arctic or somewhere else. You guys have had to talk about how you've had to pivot with your work, how you found yourself in vulnerable spaces emotionally. I was curious how that impacted the work itself, but maybe if you guys have advice for those who are interested in residencies, how could one prepare to have to flex and be emotionally vulnerable to place and people and these changing circumstances with their work?
That is a hard question in some ways, because I think it really varies for the circumstances and for the people involved. You know, I think this is a very unique residency. Most of the other residencies that I've gone to, it's very much about quiet time and still building bonds with other artists, but there's so much focus on, you know, desk time. And this residency is kind of, you know, you're on a cruise, you're stopping place to place, and the place itself is shifting, you know, and yeah, and so I mean, I think vulnerability, yeah, I mean, it's hard because it's like forced trust in some ways, you know, and for this one, you know, you're on a boat, as Kathryn said. I think they do have Wi-Fi now, is what I've learned from recent residents. But yeah, you're just completely remote, and you have to trust that the people around you have your back in some ways, and then you find the core friends that you know you really can trust. But yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just, you know, I was talking about like letting your brain be free to the experience. And for me, you know, like I have this huge anxiety problem. So being, you know, the cabins are tiny. We each have like, you share it with one other person. You have these twin bunk beds and a tiny little bathroom with a shower where you can take 3-minute showers per day. And so like everything about the situation is like, if you're an anxious person, don't do this. And so there is a quality about it where it's like you just have to trust, you know, and see what happens. And yeah, I did not answer that question directly, in part because I find it difficult, but I have gained so much from just kind of, okay, let's see. This might not go well, but let's see.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe there's a little bit of a surrender, just surrendering yourself to experience.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, the unpredictability of it is, I think for me, that was part of what's perhaps a little appealing about it, right? Is I didn't know which scientists or which artists I would be in you know, I didn't know what those conversations would be like. So, yeah, so I sort of just wandered in and I was like, I'm just going to write my notebook every day and see what happens. I found it useful pretty early on. I realized that there were usually, there was like a leaving the ship to go somewhere in the morning and then leaving the ship to go somewhere in the afternoon. And I found it was really useful to stay back for me in the afternoons and use that for time to write when the ship would be pretty quiet. And I could find either my roommate would be gone, so the room would be empty, or there'd be a space up in the dining hall where I could work. So I narrowed my outings to just one a day and decided I wanted to have time to actually process what I was seeing rather than just like keep taking in data or, you know, experiences. I mean, I would not advise people to do a trust fall on the ship. I mean, I remember like walking on the embankment, passing all these huge ships, and then seeing this little ship we were going to get on, and like trying not to cry because I was like, oh, I get it now. This is where I die. And it was very safe, and we had a wonderful captain and stuff. But like in Svalbard, there were a couple. If they watch it, they'll know who they are, but no one else will know who it is. So I'm going to just tell the story anyway. There are a couple guys that like there was like a do not enter this like mine shaft, like this coal thing that was like up the side of a mountain, and they like went up like let's see, they did that too, but the thing I saw, a bunch of young guys climbed up a hill that said like danger of landslides, and they climbed up it anyway, even though there was like don't do this signs over Svalbard. And I was like, you and you are people I need to make sure I'm never on a Zodiac right? Like I was like you know, because like I've been a party to accidents in the wild that were really devastating, and they happen, you know, they happen when you don't think they will. So I was like, I need to stay. You're lovely people, you're very fun. I will not be in a boat with you. And also because I have mom energy, I will keep my eye kind of on you a little, like not in a policing way, but just like in a, let's make sure they're okay, everybody. They make some bad decisions. Which I was maybe bringing a lot of that anxious energy, you know, even more than the guides, you know. So then I also just would try to watch our guides because I felt like they had a pretty good read. But you know, they took us out. It was so amazing. But they took us out on this hunk of ice. It was like an island of ice. Like it was just like a sheet of ice, and you know, we were able to walk around. And so like we were all well, the painters were painting and the photographers were photographing, and I was I didn't really know what to do with myself once I was on this piece of ice for 2 hours. So I was like, my mission became I took pictures of the ugliest thing I could find because I didn't want to compete with the artist. So I would like try to find, and so I have a lot of pictures of like dead fish and like really bad clumps of algae on my camera from the trip. But I was watching this like algae, this like kind of yellowy algae that looked like pee, and being like, oh, amazing, you're the beginning of life. You're so ugly, but very cool. And then like there was like a little like stream in the ice, which I was like, weird that happens. And then it like got a little bigger and it started bubbling, and I was like watching it, I was like mesmerized by the bubbling. And then at some point I like look across at like the musician, and we were both like, oh, the ice is breaking up. So but again, our guides looked very calm, and so we like jumped over the burgeoning stream. But by the time it was done, like or by the time we were all back, like what tended to, like the whole, it was big enough, it broke into first two pieces, and so like people got one, luckily the boats were on their side and people got into one boat or the other, but then there was like a third piece, and like one painter was so, he had like gone up to this like little like almost like a mountain of ice at the top, and he was painting happily looking at the horizon and did not register at any of us were doing. And in the end, he was on a pretty small piece of ice, and they were struggling to like everyone else was in boats, and they were struggling to pick him up because the wake from the boat was rocking the piece of ice. And we got back, and the guides were like, "It's, like Sarah." I remember her saying like, "The ice is very strange now," and she was sort of. I realized she was having a moment, even as a guide who had been doing this for a long time, that like she, because of climate change, the ice was changing, and she did not necessarily know what was going to happen in ways that were new to her too, right? So there was a way that she just sort of the people who know ice, right? There's a way that the way it was sintered or something, or just like the way it was relating to anyway, she said it was weird ice, and I was watching her make a mental note. But what was my point? Not a trust fall for me, but definitely like kind of like I was trying to make decisions based on who seemed to know and be making choices rooted in like knowing the land they were on pretty well. And I did have a lot of trust in our guides, even when it went a little sideways. I felt like they got everybody off in a smart and smooth way.
Yeah, that's great. I think your answer speaks a lot to really having a self-awareness of, where you find safety, especially in others, and maybe where you need to maintain personal boundaries, and just having a good self-awareness and also an awareness of just what's going on around you. So thank you for that. And thank you both for being here today and taking the time with us and for being vulnerable and open. And I hope that people who are watching are able to take some time with these answers and think about the ways that they're affected by place and the time that we're going through. And thank you, GetLit, for having me.
Thank you, Margaret. That was awesome. You did such a great job as moderator. Thank you for preparing such great questions. And thank you, Kathryn and Mita, for sharing your beautiful work today. That was a really fascinating conversation, and I think it's going to draw a lot of people to your work, which of course we love. Mita, I'm really glad also that you shared your screen because that's so cool to have more context on how you created the paper and the colors using that blue plastic. That was really awesome to think about as you were sharing. And then Kathryn, I loved when you said, believe your voice matters so much that it justifies the carbon footprint. I know you were kind of joking when you said that, but also not really. And so I think that that's so true and something that I know at least I'll be thinking about quite a lot. It's just a really powerful idea and reminder for so many of us who are pretty severely climate depressed. So thank you for that reminder. And thank you all again for this event. Thanks also to Mackenzie, GetLit's assistant coordinator, for all of their hard work today and behind the scenes leading up to this event. Thanks also to student assistant Adam Westerholm and all of our MFA interns who helped make the festival possible. To everyone watching at home, I hope that you'll join us for more festival events, both in person and here on Zoom. I also want to remind everyone at home that we have links embedded in all of our event descriptions that will lead you directly to our local indie bookstore, Auntie's, so you can purchase or pre-order all of the books by today's writers. Thank you, Auntie's, for being our official festival bookseller. Please visit our website, getlitfestival.org, for our full schedule and more information about all of our authors, including today's talented writers. Thank you again for joining, everybody. Goodbye.